Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're tuning in because we are diving into something that affects literally every single one of us who's ever had a spark of creativity. But before we really get into the meat of it, I want you to do me a quick favor. Imagine taking out your phone right now, opening up your Notes app, and just scrolling. Keep scrolling past the grocery lists, past the boring meeting notes, all the way down to the very, very bottom. What exactly is buried down there? Look, for the vast majority of us, what lives at the bottom of that app is a literal digital graveyard, right? It is just packed with half-written sentences, midnight brainwaves, random business names with absolutely zero context, and these little flashes of inspiration that we promised ourselves we'd circle back to. We feel that brief spark of excitement, but then, inevitably, life gets in the way. Our busy routines pull us away, and those ideas are just left there to gather dust. Well, today we are going to learn exactly how to rescue those ideas. You know, we usually assume that our brilliant ideas die because we don't have the funding, or maybe we think the market is just going to reject them. But our sources argue that most ideas don't actually die from a lack of capital. They die from this psychological trap called someday syndrome. It's this false comfort we give ourselves that, hey, someday the conditions are going to be absolutely perfect. We tell ourselves we'll have the free time, the energy, this flawless, risk-free plan. But without a real mechanical system to force that idea forward, someday just becomes this permanent placeholder to protect our egos from the discomfort of actually starting. And the science behind why we put things off is actually super fascinating. Because relying on sheer motivation to execute an idea, it's kind of like trying to push a broken down car uphill while it's in neutral. I mean, sure, it works for a minute if you push with everything you've got, but eventually you run out of gas and that car is rolling right back down. In psychology, they call this ego depletion. Willpower isn't magic. It's a highly finite resource. It functions exactly like a battery. Your brain literally runs out of the cognitive fuel required to do hard things just because of the daily friction of life. And that is exactly why you need a mechanical architecture instead of just crossing your fingers and hoping for the best. But okay, let's say you do find that rare free Saturday to work on your idea. We still tend to hesitate, don't we? Why is that? Well, the sources point to something called vertical anxiety. This is that deep-seated, paralyzing fear that if you step off your traditional career path to try out some unproven concept, you're somehow going to destroy all your hard-earned professional progress. It's this intense anxiety that holds back our greatest reinventions, purely because we're terrified of losing our place in the world. So how do we cure that anxiety? We need a massive paradigm shift. We've got to break away from this old static ladder mindset. On the static ladder, your career is this fragile vertical climb, right? One misstep ruins everything, and failure is just seen as a huge waste of time. Instead, we need to adopt an R&D Lab mindset. Through this lens, your career is a dynamic narrative. Even if a side venture totally fails, it's not wasted time. It is essential research. You're actively gathering highly valuable proprietary data and stress testing your own resilience. Now, why is gathering all that R&D data so absolutely critical right now? Because we are stepping right into the wisdom economy. Listen, if your job relies on a static checklist of routine tasks, the reality is algorithms and automation are catching up fast. But what an algorithm cannot easily replicate is specialized human insight, empathy, and deep contextual judgment. In the wisdom economy, your deeply human traits and your synthesized life observations, they become incredibly tangible assets. Your unique perspective is literally your currency. So the big question, how do we mechanically bridge that gap from a vague thought in a notes app to real-world execution in this wisdom economy? Well, enter the One Idea Action Pack. This is a system developed by Wisdoms. They're the creators of the difference makers in Every City project. It's a physical, success-architected blueprint designed to force abstract ideas into concrete reality. The system identifies the type of idea proposed, applies a specialized action pack framework, reveals hidden opportunities, estimates potential value creation, and produces a practical roadmap designed for that specific kind of idea. And the coolest part? This is an entirely idea-agnostic system. The One Idea Action Pack helps people transform vague ideas, frustrations, observations, and opportunities into practical experiments, actionable plans, and new possibilities they may never have even considered. It dynamically adapts to the scale of your thought. The sources highlight that it can handle mapping out the re-engineering of a failed $80 billion transit system, launching local community legacy circles, or hey, even tackling everyday plumbing frustrations, like rethinking the common toilet. Because, let's face it, there's always room for improvement there, right? Which leads us straight to the transformation pipeline. This completely replaces that vague sense of hope with strategic certainty. It literally forces the concept out of your head through 3 highly structured phases. First is the idea stage. That's where thoughts are just unshaped and gathering dust. Next up is the possibility stage. And this is where the heavy lifting really happens, deconstructing the idea and finding those unseen angles. And finally, it hits the action stage, translating all those possibilities into a highly personalized, super practical roadmap. Let's zoom in on phase 1 of that pipeline for a second, because this is where your mental clutter finally gets organized. The system deconstructs your idea across 4 pillars. First, it clarifies the absolute core essence, stripping away all that secondary noise. Second, it discovers hidden angles you might just be way too close to see. Third, it seeks to understand exactly who actually benefits from this idea. And fourth, it evaluates the real-world financial, personal, and social impact value. So what do you actually get at the end of this? The tangible output is a beautifully bound, highly personalized 12-page printed blueprint. And this isn't just some generic checklist. It provides 3 mechanical features specifically designed to cure your inertia and force you to get moving. Let's look at what those 3 features actually are. Feature number 1 is the Opportunity Scorecard. So often, we paralyze ourselves because we just don't know if our idea is objectively good, right? We completely fall victim to imposter syndrome. Well, the Opportunity Scorecard removes that emotional bias entirely. It acts as a custom, data-driven diagnostic metric that objectively measures the true market and social potential of your concept. It gives you an actual empirical foundation to justify spending your time on it. Feature number 2 is a lifesaver. It's called the simplest experiment. Human nature always makes us want to over-engineer things. We convince ourselves we need to build the entire restaurant before we sell a single sandwich. This feature stops that dead in its tracks. It forces you to identify the lowest friction, cheapest, and fastest proxy to test your core hypothesis in the real world over the next 30 days. It drastically lowers your risk while completely maximizing your learning. And feature number 3 uses this brilliant psychological trick called cognitive narrowing. Look, when the human brain looks at a project that needs hundreds of steps, it gets totally overwhelmed by the cognitive load and just shuts down. That ego depletion we talked about earlier, it kicks in instantly. The 7-day sprint bypasses this overwhelm by shrinking those massive requirements down into highly structured, microscopic, step-by-step pieces to force some serious momentum in your very first week. But the real genius of that 7-day sprint, it all boils down to the number 24. Step 7 dictates one single commitment. Just one practical, highly achievable action you must take within the next 24 hours. The system doesn't tell you to build a giant wall. It tells you to mix the mortar and lay just one brick perfectly before tomorrow. By shrinking the scope down to one single action, it actually makes taking action significantly easier than doing nothing. I really want you to take this away with you today. Running this system isn't strictly about launching a flawless $1 million business on your very first try. It is about actively building your proprietary R&D data for the future. You are taking your highly specialized human insight, stress testing it in the real world, and translating your unique life experiences into tangible assets for the wisdom economy. Everything you do here is valuable data. Everything. So you're probably wondering, how can I actually test this framework out? Well, Wisdoms is currently running a highly secure, confidential founding pilot program, and they are actively seeking 50 early adopters to test the system out. The exchange is super simple. You provide that dormant idea from the bottom of your Notes app, and the system provides the framework, returning your own personalized 12-page strategic blueprint. And get this, to incentivize a high volume of diverse ideas and really stress test their own pipeline, they have set the barrier to entry at just $9, or 99 Rand. This is a highly strategic move designed to democratize the kind of high-level consulting that's usually locked away in corporate boardrooms, making it totally accessible to everyday human intuition. It's just an incredibly low-risk way to map out your next potential breakthrough. As we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with kind of a provocative question. We've talked a lot about the personal regret of someday syndrome, but pull the lens back for a second. What is the macroeconomic cost if millions of brilliant, paradigm-shifting ideas remain locked away in our Notes apps simply out of fatigue or fear? What actually happens to a society when its collective intuition is permanently archived because people just lacked a mechanical system to get started? The next major leap forward might be sitting as a half-finished sentence on your phone right now. Please don't let it gather dust for another year. Take a look at your digital graveyard, find your best idea, and go lay that first brick. Thank you so much for joining me today, and as always, keep learning.